My name is Daniel, and I never imagined that one dinner could erase decades of memories and make me feel like a stranger in the very house where I grew up. That night was supposed to be a celebration, a simple family gathering. Instead, it became the moment I realized my place in the family had been quietly handed over to someone else, my younger brother's wife. I still remember the chill that ran down my spine as I stepped into the dining room. The table was dressed in fine china polished silver and tall crystal glasses, our family's ritual of perfection. It should have felt familiar, comforting even. But when I moved toward my usual seat, the one I had occupied since childhood, the one directly beside my father, it was already taken. My brother's wife, Natalie, sat there, her hand resting lightly on my father's arm, as if she had always belonged. She looked up at me with a smile that was polite on the surface, but carried a quiet triumph. Before I could find my voice, my mother appeared at my side. She leaned close, her words soft but cutting. "Daniel, you don't belong here anymore." The sentence sliced deeper than I could have prepared for. In that instant, it wasn't just a chair that had been taken from me. It was my identity in the family, my seat at the table of belonging. The room seemed to tilt as I searched for any sign of recognition or defense. My father avoided my eyes, pouring wine as though nothing had happened. My brother shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Natalie simply smiled, adjusting the napkin in her lap, as though the matter was settled. I tried to swallow the humiliation, to keep my hands steady as I clutched the back of a chair at the far end of the table. But inside every memory of sacrifice, of loyalty, of the childhood moments where I had carried this family's burdens, pressed against me like a weight. How quickly all of that had been erased. And yet as I turned to leave, fighting to maintain a shred of dignity, one voice cut through the silence. My grandfather's voice, steady low, but charged with something I hadn't heard from him in years. "Daniel, wait." Those two words held me frozen in place. Something in his tone told me there was more to this evening than humiliation. Something told me the story wasn't over. And that is where this journey begins. A journey that would unravel every hidden truth, every buried betrayal, and every unspoken promise. What started as a dinner meant to exclude me would become the night I discovered the power I never knew I held. I stood there stunned, my mother's words echoing inside my skull like a gavel striking down a final verdict. "You don't belong here anymore." For a long second, the air around the table seemed to thicken. No one moved. No one spoke. My father sipped his wine. My brother leaned closer to Natalie, and the faint clink of silverware on china filled the silence that had swallowed me whole. I wanted anyone to protest, to say it was a misunderstanding, to remind my mother that I was her son, not a stranger. But the protest never came. Natalie's smile widened ever so slightly, as though this was the outcome she had been hoping for. My brother glanced at me, but quickly looked away, his silence screaming louder than any words he might have spoken. I was utterly alone. I felt the heat rise in my face as my throat tightened. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of watching me break down in front of them. So I pushed my chair back, my body trembling with controlled rage, and quietly walked toward the hallway. My footsteps were slow, deliberate, echoing on the hardwood floors, as if to mark the weight of every step. Just as I reached the front door, a voice stopped me. It wasn't loud, but it carried an authority that pulled me back instantly. "Daniel." It was my grandfather. His voice was raspy with age, but steady enough to silence the room. When I turned, his eyes locked on mine, blue eyes that had seen decades of storms weathered and victories earned. "Come back," he said, and then he added 5 words that cut through the fog of humiliation like a blade. "They don't know the truth." I froze. The truth. My chest tightened with questions I didn't dare ask aloud. My family had just dismissed me as though I were expendable, yet here was my grandfather insisting there was something more, something none of them had spoken of. I hesitated, torn between storming out forever and staying to hear what this truth could possibly be. My hand lingered on the doorknob, but my heart battered and bruised as couldn't ignore the urgency in his voice. Slowly, I stepped back toward the dining room, every eye in the house watching me with a mix of irritation and curiosity. As I re-entered, the atmosphere shifted. My parents stiffened, My brother frowned, and Natalie narrowed her eyes like she had just lost a private battle. My grandfather motioned toward the chair next to him, the one usually reserved for guests outsiders. Tonight it was the only seat left for me. I sat down, but my mind was spinning. What truth could possibly outweigh the pain I had just endured? And why did my grandfather of all people seem to be holding on to it like a weapon he was waiting for the right moment to use? I picked up my water glass, my hand still shaking. The condensation slid down my palm, mirroring the unease dripping through my thoughts. If there really was something hidden, something I hadn't been told all these years, then perhaps tonight was not the end of my place in this family, but the beginning of an entirely new fight for it. And here's the part where I need to pause and speak directly to you, because this isn't just my story, it's about what families hide about the battles we fight for belonging, and about the courage it takes to claim your seat when others try to erase you. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, or if you've had to fight for your place, then I want you to stay with me through this journey. And while you're here, let me ask, where are you watching from right now? Leave a comment below and share your story. And if you believe voices like mine deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button so you won't miss the rest of what I'm about to tell you. That night, I didn't know what the truth was. All I knew was that my grandfather had cracked open a door I thought was permanently closed. Whatever secrets were about to surface, I could sense they would not only change the way I saw my family, they would change everything about my place within it. So I stayed. I picked up my fork, forced myself to eat, and waited. My humiliation was still raw, but beneath it was something else now, a flicker of defiance, a fragile spark of hope. If my grandfather believed the truth mattered, then I had to believe it too. The dinner that began as my greatest humiliation was slowly transforming into something else, a stage set for revelation. And I had no idea just how explosive that revelation would be. When I was a kid, the word family meant something very different than it did that night at the table. Back then, it meant scraped knees and laughter echoing down the block, secrets whispered under covers, and the kind of loyalty that didn't need to be spoken. My brother Michael was 3 years younger than me, but we were inseparable. I can still see us racing our bikes down the cracked pavement of our suburban street, the late summer sun painting the sky orange as we shouted dares at each other. I was the one who first steadied his handlebars when he wobbled, the one who picked him up when he crashed. "You've got this," I'd say, brushing dirt off his elbows. And he believed me, because back then he always did. We had this little red wagon, rusty at the edges, but magical to us. I would pull him for hours through the neighborhood. Sometimes we'd pretend it was a pirate ship and I was steering him into battle. Other times it was a race car, the two of us leaning forward like we were about to break the sound barrier. We built forts out of old sheets and couch cushions in the basement. We caught fireflies in jars during humid summer nights, watching them flicker, as if they were tiny lanterns built just for us. There was a closeness between us that adults commented on all the time. "Those boys are like twins," the neighbors would say, shaking their heads with a kind of admiration. And I felt proud of that, proud to be the older brother he could count on. I defended him at school, when bigger kids tried to shove him around. I even let him borrow my favorite baseball glove, the one Dad had given me because Michael swore he'd catch the winning ball at his Little League game. He didn't, but the look on his face when he tried was worth it. But those memories feel almost dangerous to touch now, like glass so thin it might shatter if I pressed too hard. Because what happened later makes me question if they ever mattered to anyone but me. I remember one winter in particular. A blizzard had swept across town, and school was canceled for 3 days straight. Michael and I bundled up in oversized coats and built a snow fort so elaborate it had tunnels, secret doors, even a throne made from ice blocks. We were kings of our own kingdom, ruling the front yard as though it were ours forever. At night we'd peel off our wet gloves and sit in front of the fireplace sipping hot cocoa while our cheeks burned red from the cold. He would lean against me half asleep while I promised him we'd build an even bigger fort next year. Those were the promises I meant. I thought we were building not just forts, but a foundation one of trust, loyalty, brotherhood. And maybe we were. But somewhere along the line, the ground shifted and that foundation cracked. Even as I sit here recalling it, I wonder, was I blind to how quickly things would change? Or did I cling so hard to the memories that I didn't see the distance growing? Because what no one tells you as a kid is that sometimes the person you love, most the one you protect, can grow into the person who hurts you the deepest. And yet I can't dismiss those early years. They matter. They explain why sitting at that dinner table watching Michael stay silent while Natalie smirked felt like betrayal layered on betrayal. Because this wasn't just my brother. This was the boy I had carried in that wagon, the one I had pulled out of fights, the one who used to tell me I was his hero. That night I realized just how far we had drifted. But remembering our childhood also lit a spark inside me. If once upon a time we had been unshakable, maybe, just maybe, there was still something left worth fighting for. I took a slow sip of water, forcing myself to stay in the moment, to stop spiraling into grief. My grandfather's words still rang in my ears. They don't know the truth. What truth could possibly re-stitch the rift that had grown between me and Michael? I didn't know yet, but I knew this childhood bonds don't just vanish. They may be buried, twisted, hidden under years of silence, but they don't disappear. And that gave me a fragile thread of hope, even as humiliation pressed hard against my chest. Because the truth is, we don't forget the people we once loved fiercely. And if that love existed once, it can sometimes become the weapon or the shield we need when the world or our own family turns against us. That dinner had started by stripping me of my place at the table. But maybe the memories of my childhood with Michael would remind me why I deserved to fight for it back. By the time high school rolled around, the closeness Michael and I once shared had begun to unravel in ways I couldn't quite stop or even understand at the time. Childhood has a way of masking the cracks, but adolescence exposes them. For me, those years were filled with late nights, studying, chasing grades, and holding on to the fragile belief that if I worked hard enough, maybe I'd finally earn the approval I'd been chasing from our parents. For Michael, though, high school meant Friday night lights, the roar of the crowd, and the easy admiration of everyone around him. He became the star quarterback, the golden boy of our small-town high school. Coaches sang his praises, teachers looked the other way when he missed assignments, and our parents beamed in the bleachers every Friday, as if his touchdowns somehow erased every one of their worries. I watched from the sidelines, half cheering, half hurting, realizing with every passing game that he was stepping into a spotlight I would never be invited to share. Meanwhile, I was drowning in a different kind of pressure, a minus on a test. To my father, it was practically failure. Daniel, and a minus is just a B in disguise. You're supposed to be better than this, he would say, barely glancing up from his briefcase. My mother wasn't any softer. She would straighten my shoulders before a dinner party, whispering, "Don't talk too much about politics or books, no one likes a know-it-all. You'll never attract the right kind of attention if you keep this up." Yet when Michael stumbled home with a C in English, Dad clapped him on the back and said, "At least you're managing both sports and school. That's leadership." The double standard was suffocating. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that grades and recognition were temporary. But deep down, it cut me in ways I didn't want to admit. Every achievement of mine, honor roll, debate club victories, science fair awards, was brushed aside like scraps on the table, while Michael's touchdowns and homecoming crown earned standing ovations. It wasn't just about school, though. It was about the way our parents looked at us. Michael was the son who fit neatly into their vision of success, athletic, charming, traditional. I was the son who asked too many questions, who read books late into the night, who wanted more than the boxes they had drawn for me. The wedge between us grew sharper when college came into the picture. I dreamed of escaping far from Boston, far from the suffocating expectations, far from the endless comparisons. I applied to universities across the country, places where no one knew my last name or cared about my brother's football stats. I ended up at Berkeley, 3,000 miles away, a campus alive with protests, ideas, and a sense of freedom I had never breathed before. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just Michael's older brother or my parents' underperforming son. I was Daniel, just Daniel. Meanwhile, Michael stayed close to home. He followed a path laid out like a red carpet, Boston College, then a job at our father's firm, and eventually an engagement to Natalie, the kind of woman my parents had practically designed in their dreams, polished, well-connected, and perfectly aligned with their definition of family legacy. Our conversations dwindled. I would call home, and the updates were always about Michael, his games, his promotions, his engagement. My news was met with polite nods, or worse, silence. When I told them I was graduating top of my class with a degree in environmental law, Dad scoffed. Is that even real law? Maybe one day you'll stop wasting your time and join us in something serious. The irony, of course, was that I was thriving. Berkeley had given me not just an education, but a sense of identity. I had friends who valued my mind professors, who encouraged my questions, and a future that felt like it was finally mine to build. I moved to San Francisco after graduation started working for a firm that specialized in corporate sustainability, and within a few years I was making enough to live comfortably in one of the most expensive cities in the country. I was proud of myself even if my family refused to be, but every time I stepped back into that Boston house, it was as if none of it mattered. My titles, my salary, my independence, none of it compared to Michael's proximity, his football trophies, his picture-perfect engagement. I was still the outsider, still the boy who couldn't quite live up to the standards my parents had set. Looking back, I realized this was the true turning point. Childhood had given me memories of brotherhood and warmth, but adulthood forced me to see the hierarchy that ruled our family. Michael wasn't just my younger brother anymore. He was their chosen son, the one they had placed on a pedestal I could never reach. And me, I was already halfway out the door building a life of my own on the opposite coast. But the ties of family, no matter how frayed, have a way of pulling you back. I didn't know it yet, but the choices I made to carve my own path would eventually collide with theirs in ways none of us could have imagined. Because sometimes the paths we take to escape the past are the same ones that bring us face to face with it again. And when that reckoning comes, there's nowhere left to hide. I still remember the day I boarded the plane to California. My suitcase was too heavy. My ticket was one way, and my heart was pounding with a mix of terror and relief. At 18, I had finally clawed my way free from the house, where every breath felt monitored, where every achievement was met with "you could do better," and where love seemed rationed based on how well you performed in their script. Leaving Boston was more than going to college. It was escaping a role I never auditioned for. At Berkeley, I wasn't the son compared to his golden brother. I wasn't the disappointment. I was Daniel, a kid who worked himself ragged to prove he belonged. And for the first time, I didn't feel invisible. Professors encouraged me. Friends admired me for my wit, my conviction, not for fitting into a mold. I studied harder than I'd ever studied before graduating summa cum laude in environmental law. San Francisco was the next chapter. My first job at a sustainability firm didn't pay much at first, but it gave me a sense of purpose. I was part of something larger than myself, fighting for cleaner oceans, standing up to corporations that thought they could buy their way out of accountability. My paychecks grew, my confidence grew, and eventually I made junior partner. I bought my own apartment overlooking the city small, but mine every corner paid for by my own work. And yet none of this mattered when I visited home. I'd walk into the house proud of a case I'd just won, and my father would smirk. Environmental law, is that even real law? My mother would skip right past my career to ask, when are you going to settle down, find someone respectable? The questions weren't questions. They were judgments, daggers hidden behind polite smiles. Meanwhile, Michael was everything they wanted. He had stayed in Boston, played football in college, slid into a job at Dad's law firm, and married Natalie, whose polished charm seemed to hypnotize them all. He bought a house 10 minutes away, the perfect son, building the perfect life. My parents went to every football game, every firm dinner, every holiday at his place. When I called, they always seemed to have somewhere else to be. That was when it hit me, no matter how high I climbed in their eyes, I'd always be the boy who didn't measure up. But here's the thing, I learned something critical out west. Distance can wound you, but it can also heal you. Being 3,000 miles away forced me to build a community that valued me. My coworkers, my friends, they were my real family. And they gave me a perspective I couldn't see. When I was still suffocating in Boston, I didn't need my parents' approval to validate my worth. Still, their rejection left scars. Every cutting remark echoed louder because it came from the people I once believed should have lifted me up. And no matter how hard I tried to harden myself, some part of me still craved their recognition. That was the hook that kept me coming back on holidays. The thread of hope, that maybe this time would be different. It never was. Each visit left me emptier, like pouring myself into a glass with no bottom. But in that emptiness, I made a vow. If my family refused to see me, I would stop begging them to. I would define myself by my own terms, not theirs. That vow became my shield, the thing that let me keep moving forward, even when their words dug deep. And right now, as you listen, I want to pause and turn to you. Because maybe you felt the same sting, the sting of being overlooked, undervalued, or dismissed by the very people who should have celebrated you. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to fight to prove your worth to those closest to you? Share it below, I'll be reading every single one. And if you believe no one should ever have to beg for a seat at their own family's table, make sure you subscribe so we can keep having these conversations. That vow I made to stop chasing their approval was what allowed me to keep my head high later when the real test came. Because no matter how far you run, life has a way of dragging you back to face the ghosts you thought you left behind. And as I would soon discover, the ghosts in my family's house weren't just about old wounds. They were about secrets buried so deep that when they finally came to light, they would shatter everything we thought we knew about who belonged and who didn't. The first time I met Natalie, my brother Michael's soon-to-be wife, I should have trusted my instincts. She walked into the room with a homemade pie in her hands and a perfectly tailored smile, the kind that felt rehearsed in front of a mirror. My mother nearly fainted with delight. "Oh, Natalie, you shouldn't have," she cooed, as though Natalie had single-handedly brought world peace wrapped in pastry crust. From that moment on, I knew things were about to change. It started small. At Sunday dinners, where I once sat beside my father, Natalie began to dominate conversations. My mother asked her opinion on recipes, my father deferred to her judgment on investments, and Michael stared at her like she had hung the moon. Meanwhile, I became the silent observer, my words pushed aside like background noise. The final blow came when I returned home one weekend and discovered my childhood bedroom. My sanctuary filled with trophies, books, and years of memories had been gutted. In its place was a sleek, impersonal home office, Natalie's office. My belongings were stuffed in boxes and shoved into the attic. When I confronted my mother, she waved it off. We needed to make room for the next generation. Natalie needs a proper space to work. I stood there in shock, staring at the empty walls that once held pieces of me. Every corner of that house whispered her name while mine was being erased. And Natalie, she wielded subtle cruelty like a weapon. She never insulted me outright. No, she was far too clever for that. Instead, she dressed her jabs in velvet. "Daniel, your apartment in San Francisco sounds so cozy. It must be nice not worrying about maintaining a real house." Or, "That outfit is so brave. I could never pull off something so casual at a family dinner." Each comment laced with sugar, each one designed to slice just deep enough that I couldn't call it out without looking paranoid. My parents ate it up. To them, Natalie was the daughter they had always wanted, polished, poised, and endlessly agreeable. My mother gushed about her sense of style, my father praised her business degree, and even Michael, the brother who once shared firefly jars and snow forts with me, had begun echoing her words. And every time I tried to contribute, it backfired. When I brought a bottle of fine wine to dinner, my father sniffed that it was pretentious. When I offered to cook a vegan meal, my mother helped by dousing it in cream and butter, ruining it entirely. Natalie smiled sweetly as if to say, "See, you'll never fit here the way I do." The worst part wasn't just their favoritism, it was Michael's silence. The boy who used to stand at my side against the world now sat quietly while his wife chipped away at me piece by piece. His loyalty had shifted, and with it so had my place in the family. I started to realize I was no longer just the outsider by choice. I was being actively pushed out. Every action, every gesture, every pointed comment was a reminder this was Natalie's stage now, and I was just the unwanted understudy. Looking back, I wonder if I could have fought harder, spoken louder, refused to be erased. But the truth is, sometimes the more you push, the more invisible you become to those determined not to see you. And in that house, with Natalie dazzling everyone, I had become invisible. But let me pause here because I want to know what you think. Have you ever met someone who seemed too perfect, so polished on the outside, yet every word from their mouth chipped away at you inside? Tell me in the comments, because I know I'm not the only one who has lived through this kind of subtle warfare. Natalie's arrival didn't just change my family dynamic, it upended it completely. Every dinner, every holiday, every tradition I once held onto became the Natalie show. I wasn't just excluded anymore, I was being rewritten out of the story. And yet, as unbearable as it was, I couldn't shake the sense that there was more beneath the surface. My grandfather's cryptic warning, "They don't know the truth," kept replaying in my mind. If Natalie had claimed my place, if my parents had handed her the keys to belonging, then what role was I meant to play in this unfolding drama? The answer I would soon find out was bigger than I ever imagined. The cruelty didn't come in storms, it came in whispers. That was Natalie's specialty: humiliation wrapped in politeness, daggers dipped in honey. And somehow, she made everyone else believe she was being gracious, even kind. It would start with her tone soft and sweet, always framed as though she was helping. At a family dinner, she'd glance at my shirt and say, "Daniel, that color is so bold on you. I could never pull off something so casual at a formal dinner." My parents would chuckle, nodding in agreement as though she had just paid me a compliment instead of reducing me to a man-child who couldn't dress properly. Or she'd lean across the table, voice dripping with concern, and ask, "How's your little apartment in San Francisco? It must feel so cozy, like a starter place." "I'm sure one day you'll upgrade to a real home." I would feel the weight of those words sink in. Cozy, starter, not real. My father would laugh, raise his glass to the suburban mansion lifestyle he worshipped, while my mother smiled proudly at Natalie as though she'd just passed some invisible test. What hurt the most wasn't even the digs themselves, it was how seamlessly they fit into the family's worldview. My parents never challenged her. Instead, they rewarded her. She had mastered the art of reflecting back their values, wealth, appearances, conformity, and she used me as the contrast to highlight her perfection. The deeper cut came through Michael. When we were kids, he would have snapped back at anyone who talked down to me. Now he just sat there, sometimes nodding in agreement, sometimes echoing her words. "Maybe Natalie's right," he said once during a phone call. "Maybe it's time you thought about moving back to Boston, get a real job. Dad could set you up at the firm." His tone was casual, dismissive, as though my entire career, one I had built brick by brick, was nothing more than a phase I needed to grow out of. I remember gripping the phone tighter, fighting the urge to scream. "Michael," I said, steadying my voice, "I'm a junior partner at a respected firm. I just led a case that made national headlines. That's not pretend law." But his silence on the other end told me everything. He wasn't speaking for himself anymore. He was speaking through Natalie's lens. And that's how humiliation works. When it's subtle, it erodes you piece by piece until you start questioning your own footing. I found myself replaying her comments late at night, wondering if she was right. Was my apartment too small? Was my career not respectable enough? Was I really just chasing ideals that no one else valued? But then every Sunday night I'd call my grandfather, and he'd remind me of the truth. "Daniel, don't let them tell you your work doesn't matter. You're doing what most people wouldn't dare, standing for something bigger than yourself." His voice steadied me, reminded me that there was a world beyond that suffocating house. Still, the poison was working. My parents praised Natalie for her helpful advice. Neighbors called her the perfect daughter-in-law, and I became the family's punchline. At gatherings, Michael would retell Natalie's quips like inside jokes. "You should have seen Daniel's little vegan dish. Natalie had to save it with real butter." Everyone laughed except me. The truth, I wasn't just being mocked, I was being erased. Slowly, systematically, Natalie was reshaping the family dynamic to make me irrelevant. And the worst part, they let her. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from sitting at a table surrounded by people you've known your whole life and realizing none of them see you anymore. That night, as I listened to her innocent comments and my family's laughter, I realized I was fading into the margins of my own story. But here's where I want to turn to you. Have you ever been in a room full of people you should have belonged to and yet felt invisible? Like every word you spoke only made you smaller. Drop your story in the comments because I know this kind of isolation isn't mine alone. Natalie's strategy worked brilliantly in their eyes. In mine, it was suffocating. But even as I sat there swallowing my anger, my grandfather's eyes caught mine across the table. His look wasn't pity, it wasn't shame. It was something else, something that hinted at knowledge, deeper than this, pettiness. And in that moment, though I couldn't have known it yet, I realized Natalie's subtle humiliations were setting the stage for something much larger, something that would soon flip this entire script upside down. The night everything broke open wasn't supposed to be extraordinary. My parents called it a special family dinner, but I didn't know what they meant until I walked into the dining room and saw the glow on Natalie's face, the way her hand rested protectively over her stomach. My gut knew, before the words left her lips, she was pregnant. At first there was that instinctive flicker of joy. Despite everything, some part of me thought I'm going to be an uncle. But that warmth lasted only seconds before it was drowned by the wave of attention and adoration that swept across the table. My mother burst into tears, clutching Natalie's hand. My father lifted his glass, declaring, "To the next generation," Michael grinned like he had just scored another touchdown. And me, I sat silent, invisible, watching as they built an entire future that didn't include me. The celebration quickly turned into a planning session. They talked nursery colors, private preschools, even future summer camps. My father suggested Michael and Natalie consider moving into a bigger place. That's when the air in the room shifted, the ground beneath me giving way. You know, my father said, setting down his fork, this house was always meant for a family. 5 bedrooms, a yard for children to play in. It might make sense for you and Natalie to move in here. I froze fork halfway to my mouth. Move in here, this house. What about you and Mom? Michael asked. My father waved a hand casually. Your mother and I have been considering downsizing. A condo in the city would suit us fine. He glanced at my grandfather in the corner. And Dad? Well, we'd find suitable arrangements for him. My chest tightened. Suitable arrangements. Those 2 words were a knife. My grandfather, who had lived in the guest house since Grandma died, who built this house with his own 2 hands, was being talked about like an inconvenient piece of furniture to be moved aside for the next generation. I set my fork down slowly. You're talking about moving Grandpa out of his home. My voice shook not from fear, but from the sheer disbelief that no one else seemed to find this outrageous. My mother sighed as though I were being dramatic. Daniel, this is a family discussion. And what am I? I shot back before I could stop myself. The words hung heavy in the air. For a moment, silence stretched across the table. My father avoided my eyes. Michael shifted in his seat. Natalie smirked faintly, her hand smoothing over her stomach, as though she had already claimed the house as hers. Finally, my mother leaned forward, her voice sharp and final. You're the one who chose to leave, Daniel. You made yourself an outsider when you moved across the country and rejected everything we taught you. Natalie embraces family values. She's giving us the possibility of grandchildren. What exactly have you given this family? Her words struck like a slap. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. The truth was, I had given them everything I could. My loyalty, my effort, my achievements. But none of it had ever been enough. Natalie broke the silence next. Her tone was syrupy sweet, but the venom underneath was unmistakable. Maybe Daniel would be more comfortable eating in the kitchen. He seems determined to ruin our special night. I turned to Michael, desperate for the brother I once knew to stand up, to say something, anything. But he stared at his plate, jaw tight, silent. That was when my mother delivered the final blow. She stood, her face hard. Enough. For years you've chosen to separate yourself from this family. You don't belong here, Daniel. Not anymore. The words sucked the air from the room. My heart pounded, and for a moment I thought I might collapse under the weight of them. But I didn't. I pushed my chair back, placed my napkin gently on the table, and stood. My hands trembled, but my voice came out steady. I see. Then I'll go. Not a single person stopped me. Not one word of protest left their lips. My father poured more wine. My mother sat down as though nothing had happened. Michael's silence was the loudest betrayal of all, and Natalie. She smiled, satisfied. As I walked away from that table, I thought this was the end. The end of my place in the family, the end of the fragile hope that one day things might change. But as I reached the door, ready to leave forever, I heard the sound of a cane tapping against the hardwood floor. Daniel, my grandfather's voice called out, strong and commanding. Don't leave, not yet. And just like that, the story I thought was ending had only just begun. I climbed the stairs that night with my chest caving in, dragging my suitcase out from the closet, like I had done 100 times before, except this time I knew it wasn't temporary. Every zipper I pulled, shut. Every shirt I shoved into that bag felt like another nail sealing off my connection to them. My mother's words still echoed in my skull. You don't belong here, Daniel. Not anymore. The silence of the house pressed in on me. Downstairs, I could hear faint laughter drifting from the dining room, as if my absence had been nothing more than an inconvenience quickly corrected. They were celebrating Natalie's pregnancy, Michael's perfect life, while I folded myself out of existence in the guest room. I sank onto the bed, suitcase half-packed, and buried my face in my hands. I had fought so hard to build a life worth being proud of. I had clawed my way into a career, carved out an identity 3,000 miles away. But here in this house, none of it mattered. To them, I was still the boy who had failed to meet their expectations. And now, they had said it out loud, I was no longer family. The tears came hot and fast, not just from pain, but from rage. Rage at myself for still caring, for still wanting their approval after all these years. Rage at Michael for sitting there silent while his wife suggested I should eat in the kitchen like some disobedient child. Rage at Natalie for twisting every moment into her victory. Rage at my parents for letting it happen. The truth is, it wasn't just humiliation. I felt it was grief. Grief for the brother I had lost. Grief for the family that never truly saw me. Grief for the years I spent hoping they might one day look at me and finally say, "We're proud of you." I zipped the suitcase shut, the sound final sharp. My hand shook as I reached for my phone to call a cab. This was it. I was leaving Boston behind for good. I would never again put myself in a position where they could humiliate me, never again hope for a place at a table that clearly wasn't mine. And yet, just as I reached for the doorknob, I heard it, a voice I couldn't ignore. From the dining room came my grandfather's roar, his voice normally steady and calm, now shaking with anger. This is not what Evelyn would have wanted. I froze. Evelyn, my grandmother. Her name rarely passed anyone's lips since she had died, but the way he said it, it wasn't nostalgia, it was accusation. Curiosity overpowered the grief. I stepped quietly toward the stairs, suitcase still in my hand, straining to hear. My father's voice rose next, defensive, almost panicked. She abandoned this family, Dad. She made her choice when she walked away. And then came my grandfather again, fiercer now. No. You never gave her acceptance. You never gave her freedom. You never gave her the right to be herself. The words slammed into me. Was he talking about Grandma Evelyn, or was he talking about me? I edged closer, heart pounding, but before I could catch more, the front door creaked open. The cab driver had arrived, silhouetted by the porch light. For a moment, I thought about leaving anyway. I thought about stepping out into the night, letting whatever truth my grandfather was hinting at remain buried with the rest of their secrets. But then I remembered the look in his eyes at the dinner table, the way he had squeezed my hand under the cloth as if he was holding on to more than just me. There was something he wasn't saying, something he was waiting for the right moment to reveal. And in that moment of indecision, I realized this story wasn't over. So I set my suitcase down by the door and turned back toward the hall, every nerve in my body alive with dread and anticipation. Because if my grandfather was right, if there was a truth they didn't know, then maybe everything I thought I had lost that night wasn't gone after all. And here's where I'll pause, because I want you to feel what I felt, standing at that door, suitcase in hand, heart, torn between escape and revelation. If you've ever stood at a crossroads wanting to run, but sensing that one step back could change everything, then you know the ache in my chest that night. Tell me, what would you have done? Would you have left or stayed to hear the truth? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I didn't know it then, but that single decision whether to walk out or turn back was the line that divided everything before from everything after. The night wasn't ending. It was only beginning. I stood frozen at the bottom of the staircase, my suitcase still by the front door, when the sound of my grandfather's cane striking the hardwood floor echoed through the hallway. Each thump felt like a drum beat pulling me back toward the dining room. When I finally stepped inside, the scene was tense, as if the air itself had thickened. My parents sat stiff-backed, their lips pressed thin, their eyes sharp with irritation. Michael stared at his hands, unable or unwilling to meet my gaze. Natalie leaned elegantly in her chair, a faint smile playing at the corner of her mouth, as though she had already won whatever invisible war was being fought. And then there was my grandfather, Harold. At 82, his body moved slowly, but his presence filled the room like a force of nature. He pushed himself up from his chair, gripping his cane, and for a moment, I saw not the frail old man they treated like an afterthought, but the builder, the patriarch, the man who had raised walls with his own hands and carved a life from nothing. Daniel isn't leaving, he declared, his voice cutting through the silence with surprising strength. My mother's head snapped toward him. Dad, this isn't the time. This is exactly the time, he interrupted, his tone sharp, unwavering. You've humiliated him long enough. Tonight I watched as my grandson was pushed out of his place, his voice silenced, his worth dismissed. And I will not stand for it. The room went still. My father cleared his throat, trying to reclaim control. Dad, Daniel made his choice years ago when he left. He turned his back on this family. My grandfather's cane struck the floor once more, punctuating his words like an exclamation. No. You turned your back on him, just like you did with Evelyn. Her name dropped like a bomb. My grandmother gone for 5 years, yet still the ghost that lingered in every corner of this house. My father stiffened, his face paling. Leave your wife out of this, he muttered. But my grandfather pressed on, his voice rising with a conviction that made the hair on my arms stand up. Evelyn saw through you. She saw how you crushed anything that didn't fit your image of success. She saw how you played favorites, how you elevated one child and diminished the other. She was ashamed of it. My mother gasped, her voice sharp with indignation. That's not true. Evelyn loved this family. She loved Daniel. My grandfather shot back, his eyes burning now. She saw him for who he truly was. And she left behind more than memories. She left behind a truth none of you want to face. I felt my pulse quicken, my mind racing. What truth? Why was he saying this now? Natalie's voice, smooth and cutting, sliced through the tension. Harold, with all due respect, this isn't about the past. This dinner is about family, about celebrating the future. My grandfather turned on her with a glare that silenced her mid-sentence. Family. You dare talk about family while you mock my grandson and plot to shove me out of the home I built with my own hands? You don't know the first thing about family. The silence that followed was suffocating. My father tried to interject again, but my grandfather raised his hand, commanding the room in a way I had never seen before. His frailty seemed to melt away, leaving only authority. This ends tonight, he said firmly. The lies, the favoritism, the cruelty, it all ends. There are things you don't know, things Evelyn entrusted me with, and it's time they were revealed. I looked at him, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. His eyes met mine, steady and resolute, and for the first time all evening I felt the ground shift beneath me. Whatever he was about to say wasn't just about the past. It was about me, about my place, about why he had stopped me at the door and told me not to leave. And deep down I knew I wasn't prepared for what was coming. Because in that moment, with the entire family staring at him, my grandfather was about to detonate the secret that would rip this house and everything it stood for wide open. My grandfather's hand trembled slightly as he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. For a second, I thought maybe age had finally caught up with him, but then I realized it wasn't weakness. It was gravity. Whatever he was about to reveal had been carried like a stone in his chest for years, maybe decades. He pulled out a thick envelope, the kind you only ever see when lawyers are involved. The edges were worn, the paper yellowed slightly from time. He set it on the table with a deliberate weight, as if to say, "This is heavier than any of your judgments." My father's brow furrowed. "Dad, what is this?" "This," Grandpa said, his voice steady, "is the truth Evelyn wanted you to hear. And since none of you have shown Daniel the respect he deserves, tonight is the night you'll finally know what she left behind." Natalie's smirk faltered for the first time. My mother leaned forward, suspicion tightening her face. "What do you mean, left behind? This house has been in Franklin's family for generations." Grandpa shook his head slowly, the corners of his mouth curling in something between sadness and triumph. "No, Elaine, that's the story you like to tell at dinner parties. But the legal reality is very different. When Evelyn and I set up our trust over 20 years ago, we transferred the house into her name for tax purposes. And before she passed," he paused, looking at me, "she changed her will." The words landed like thunder. My father's voice rose brittle with disbelief. "Changed her will to who?" "To Daniel," my grandfather said, firm and unflinching. "This house, this land, it's been his since the day Evelyn died." The silence that followed was so total, I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. My fork slipped from my hand and clattered onto my plate, but no one moved to pick it up. My mother went pale, her lips parting in shock. Michael blinked rapidly, as if trying to process a language he didn't understand. Natalie's eyes widened, then narrowed, calculation sparking behind them. Finally, I managed to find my voice. Grandpa, what are you talking about? He slid the papers out of the envelope and spread them across the table, notarized documents, legal seals, signatures in my grandmother's elegant hand. Evelyn believed in you, Daniel. She knew you'd forge your own path, one that didn't fit neatly into the mold this family worships. She wanted to make sure you had something no one could take from you, a place that was yours. Not because you conformed, but because you didn't. I stared down at the documents, the words swimming in my vision. Owner, beneficiary, sole heir. It was all there in black and white. The house I had grown up in, the house that held every memory of my childhood, the house my parents had used as a weapon to remind me I was lesser, it was mine. It had always been mine. My father grabbed the papers, scanning them with frantic eyes. This is outrageous. She couldn't have been in her right mind when she signed this. Grandpa's cane struck the floor like a gavel. Don't you dare insult her. She knew exactly what she was doing. She told me Harold Daniel will need this house to claim his place one day. Don't let them push him out. I felt my throat tighten, my eyes burning. My grandmother, gone for years, had believed in me in a way my parents never had. Even in death, she had reached across time to give me something they couldn't erase, belonging. Natalie finally broke the silence, her voice sharp, her veneer of sweetness cracked. You can't possibly think you'll just waltz in and take over. This house is meant for family. I turned toward her, the shock in my chest beginning to burn into something else, resolve. And what am I, Natalie? Because from where I'm sitting, the only reason you think you belong here is because everyone decided I didn't. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Michael finally spoke, his voice small, uncertain. So, what happens now? Daniel kicks us all out, sells the place, gets revenge. All eyes turned to me, waiting for my answer. For the first time, the power wasn't in their hands, it was in mine. And the weight of it pressed down on me with terrifying clarity. I didn't know what I would do yet, but I knew one thing for certain. The boy they thought they could erase had just been handed the pen to rewrite the entire story. The papers lay on the table like a live grenade, their edges trembling slightly under the air vent's hum. My father's hand gripped the documents so tightly I thought he might rip them in half, while my mother's knuckles whitened as she clutched her wine glass. Natalie leaned forward, eyes narrowing into sharp little blades, her perfect facade cracked just enough to show the fury simmering underneath. And me, I sat there stunned, my pulse hammering in my ears. This house, the same house where I had been told I didn't belong just an hour earlier, was legally mine. Not theirs, not Michael's, not Natalie's, mine. My grandfather remained standing, his cane planted firmly like a judge's gavel. Evelyn wanted it this way, he said, his voice iron steady. She saw something in Daniel none of you cared to see, and she trusted him to carry her legacy when the time was right. Michael finally found his voice. So what you're saying, my brother owns the house, that we've just been guests this whole time? Grandpa nodded. That's exactly what I'm saying. My father slammed his palm against the table, rattling the silverware. This is madness. Evelyn betrayed this family. She undermined me, undermined all of us. No, Grandpa replied, eyes narrowing. She saved this family from itself. She knew if Daniel wasn't protected, you'd destroy him like you tried to destroy her spirit. My mother snapped her head toward me, her tone dripping with venom. And what do you intend to do with it, Daniel? Throw us out, parade around like some kind of victor? You don't even live here anymore. Your life is in California. Her words cut deep, but not the way they used to. Because for the first time, I wasn't powerless. The weight of the house keys, though not yet in my pocket, was already pressing into my palm. Natalie spoke next, her voice sharp, dismissing the sugarcoating she once hid behind. This is clearly about revenge. You've always resented us, Daniel. And now you think you can use this house to settle the score. But let me remind you, this family is moving forward. Michael and I are building a life, a child, a future. You're clinging to scraps of the past. I locked eyes with her, a steady calm rising in me. Funny, I said quietly, because according to these papers, the past belongs to me. For the first time, Natalie had no immediate comeback. Her lips pressed tight, her hand tightening protectively over her stomach. Michael looked torn, his eyes darting between me, Natalie, and our parents. Dan. What happens now? He asked again, softer this time, almost pleading. That question hung in the air, suffocating. I didn't have an answer yet. My mind was a storm, images of being erased, mocked, pushed aside, all colliding with the sudden surge of power placed in my lap. I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs scraping against the floor. I don't know, I admitted. I need time. This isn't a decision I can make in one night. That's not good enough, my father barked. It's the only answer you're getting, I shot back, my voice steady now. For the first time in years, I wasn't shrinking under his gaze. The room bristled with tension, every eye fixed on me. But underneath the chaos, I felt it, the shift. The control was no longer theirs. For once, they were the ones waiting, scrambling, unsure. And here's where I need to pause. Because standing in that room with the entire balance of my family tilting, I realized something. Sometimes power doesn't roar, it whispers. Tell me, if you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Claimed the house outright, or waited to see how they reacted? Drop your thoughts below. I want to know how you'd play this hand. That night, I walked out of the dining room not defeated, but armed with something I had never had before: choice. My grandmother had given me the one weapon my family couldn't strip away: ownership. And while I didn't yet know how I would use it, I knew one thing for certain. The house that had been the scene of my deepest rejection had just become the stage for my reckoning. What none of them realized yet was that this story wasn't about the house itself. It was about the shift in power. And from this point on, nothing would ever be the same. The next morning, the house felt different. The walls that once pressed in on me now seemed to lean outward, like they were waiting for me to decide their fate. I came downstairs to find my parents in the kitchen, my mother scrubbing an already spotless counter, my father hiding behind the newspaper as if ink on a page could shield him from the truth laid bare last night. Michael and Natalie were at the table, whispering in low voices that stopped abruptly the moment I entered. "Morning," I said evenly, pouring myself coffee. No one replied. The silence was thicker than the steam rising from my mug. I set the cup down and let the pause stretch before breaking it. "We need to talk about what happens next." My father folded the newspaper with sharp, deliberate movements. "There's nothing to discuss. We'll be contesting that will." Grandpa Harold, who had just walked in, tapped his cane against the tile. "Don't waste your breath, Franklin. Evelyn's will was airtight. You know it, and so do your lawyers. You'll only embarrass yourself trying." My mother turned to me, her eyes sharp but calculated. "Daniel, surely you see how ridiculous this is. You don't even live here. Meanwhile, your brother is starting a family. This house was meant for that, not for you to wave around like some trophy." I leaned forward, my palms flat on the counter. This house was meant for family, real family. And if any of you want to keep living here, then things are going to change. That made them all look up. Even Natalie, who had been twirling her wedding ring absent-mindedly, froze. "Change?" my father echoed, incredulous. "Yes," I said, my voice steady, now stronger than I felt inside. "For once, my terms are the ones that matter." I ticked them off on my fingers. First, respect. I won't be treated as an outsider anymore. No more dismissive comments about my career, my choices, or my worth. If you want to share this house, you treat me as an equal. Period. My mother opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. "I'm not done. Second Grandpa stays in the guest house, no conditions, no discussions about suitable arrangements. This is his home. He built it, he belongs here as long as he wants." Grandpa's eyes glistened, his hand tightening around the handle of his cane. Third, I continued, turning toward Michael. "This house remains open to you and your child. You'll always have a place here." But I shifted my gaze to Natalie. That welcome only extends to those who can treat me with basic respect. No more backhanded compliments, no more digs, dressed as kindness. You can't have this house and tear me down at the same time. The silence that followed was deafening. My father's face flushed red, my mother's jaw clenched, and Natalie's smile thinned into a razor's edge. Michael looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time in years. "You're dictating terms to your own parents?" my mother snapped. "Yes," I said firmly, "because ownership comes with responsibility, and I refuse to let this house continue as a place where one person is valued and another is dismissed. If you want to be here, you accept the terms. If not, you make your choice." My words hung in the air, heavy and unfamiliar. For the first time, they were forced to react to me, not the other way around. And here's the part where I'll pull you in, because I know you're wondering, was I being bold or reckless? If you were sitting at that table with the power suddenly in your hands, would you have laid down terms? Or would you have walked away and left them to their bitterness? Tell me in the comments, because this moment right here, it was the hinge everything turned on. My father stood abruptly, his chair screeching against the tile. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice low with fury. "You think you can waltz back after years away and set rules? We'll see about that." He stormed out, leaving my mother pale and tight-lipped. But Michael, he surprised me. He leaned forward, his voice quiet but steady. "Daniel's right," he said. All eyes snapped to him, even Natalie's, which filled with outrage. But he pressed on. "We haven't been fair to him. I haven't been fair to him. He deserves better from all of us." For the first time in years, I saw a flicker of the brother I used to know. And it hit me then this wasn't just about a house. It was about rewriting the rules of what family meant. The battle wasn't over. If anything, it was only beginning. But the ground had shifted. For once, I wasn't begging for a place at the table. I was setting the terms for it. And none of them, not even Natalie, were ready for the twist that was still to come. The kitchen felt like a battlefield, the air heavy with the weight of words that could not be unsaid. My father had stormed out, but the tension he left behind clung to the walls like smoke. My mother sat stiffly, her lips pressed into a thin line. Natalie's eyes burned with outrage, and Michael looked torn in two, caught between the life he had built with his wife and the brother he had nearly lost. I stood my ground. For once, I wasn't the one shrinking in that house. My voice had been quiet for too long, and now, with the truth of my grandmother's will hanging in the air, I had the power to make them listen. "You think this is about revenge?" I said, my tone calm but unyielding. "It's not. I didn't ask for this house, I didn't plan for this power, but I won't let it be used as a weapon to erase me anymore. Not by you, not by anyone." Natalie leaned forward, her composure cracking, her words sharp as glass. "This is unbelievable. You're trying to control us, to dictate where we live, how we live. You're jealous because Michael and I are building a real family while you—" "Enough," Michael said suddenly, his voice cutting through hers. It startled all of us. His fists clenched on the table. "Natalie, stop." Her head whipped toward him, her jaw dropping. "Excuse me." He looked at me, then his eyes filled with regret I hadn't seen in years. "Daniel's right. We've treated him like he doesn't matter, and I've let it happen. I've been silent when I should have stood up for him. That ends now." My throat tightened, but I forced myself to stay steady. "Michael, do you mean that?" He nodded. "I do. I forgot who we were, what we were before all of this. You were my brother first, and somewhere along the way, I let that slip away." His voice cracked. "I'm sorry, Dan." For a moment, I saw the boy I used to pull in a red wagon, the one who laughed with me under summer firefly skies. And I knew deep down that apology wasn't easy for him to give. Natalie, however, wasn't moved. She shot to her feet, her face flushed with fury. "You can't be serious. You're taking his side after everything. This house was supposed to be ours." I looked at her calmly. "That's the difference between us, Natalie. You see it as yours for the taking. I see it as ours for the keeping. But the terms have changed." My mother finally spoke, her voice cold and brittle. "Daniel, you're tearing this family apart." I met her gaze head on. "No, Mom. This family was already broken. I'm just refusing to keep pretending it isn't." The silence that followed was thick, but not empty. It was the silence of walls shifting, of foundations cracking. My father re-entered the room, then his expression grim, as if he had already spoken to the attorneys in his head. But even he looked unsettled by Michael's newfound defiance. "Listen carefully," I said, my voice low but firm. "I won't force anyone out of this house, but I will no longer beg for a place in it. If you choose to stay, it's under the terms of respect, equality, and dignity. If you can't accept that, then you've made your choice to walk away." It was a line drawn in the sand, one they couldn't ignore. And here's where I want to pause and pull you in. What would you have done if you were me, thrown them out for years of cruelty, or offered them a second chance under strict conditions? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear how you'd carry this kind of power. Natalie stormed out, her heels striking the tile like gunfire. Michael followed after her, torn between loyalty and love. My mother sat quietly, her hands trembling, while my father's jaw clenched, as though chewing down his pride. But my grandfather smiled faintly, his eyes glistening with pride. "Evelyn was right," he whispered. "You found your voice." And though the war wasn't over, the tide had turned. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving in that house. I was leading it. The final confrontation was coming, and I knew it wouldn't be easy. But the choice was no longer theirs. It was mine. The storm of that night lingered for weeks, echoing in every strained phone call, every silence that replaced the casual chatter we once faked. But 1 year later, standing on the porch of the house that was now legally mine, I could see how far we had come. The white columns still gleamed in the sun, the same flowers bloomed in the beds my mother had planted. But something fundamental, had shifted the house, no longer symbolized rejection. It symbolized choice. My choice. In those early months, my father fought hardest against the new reality. He called lawyers, pulled strings, did everything in his power to contest Evelyn's will. But the documents were ironclad. Eventually, practicality beat out pride. One evening during a quiet phone call, he sighed and said, "She always was stubborn." I suppose you get that from her. Coming from him, those words were more than an admission. They were the closest thing to a compliment he had ever given me. My mother took longer. She wielded her disapproval like a weapon, every conversation lined with sharp edges. But even she couldn't ignore what time had revealed, that I wasn't going anywhere, that this house had my name etched into its foundation. The turning point came when Michael and Natalie's son was born. They named him James Harold, after our grandfather. And for the first time in years, my mother called me not to criticize, but to ask if I would come home. Holding James in my arms, tiny fingers curling around mine, something inside me cracked open. He didn't know the history, the wounds, the betrayals. To him, I wasn't the outsider. I was Uncle Daniel. And in that moment, I realized that forgiveness wasn't about excusing the past. It was about choosing a future. Michael, to his credit, stepped into fatherhood with a kind of humility that softened the distance between us. One night, as James slept in his crib, Michael and I sat on the porch swing where we used to trade secrets as kids. "I failed you," he admitted, staring out at the stars. "When you needed me, I stayed silent. I let them tear you down. I'm sorry." It wasn't a grand gesture. It was quiet, raw, real, and it was enough. Natalie surprisingly softened too, not overnight but slowly. When she handed James to me and said, "He has your eyes," it wasn't just small talk. It was acknowledgement, a truce in words she couldn't bring herself to say otherwise. Grandpa thrived in those months lighter now that Evelyn's secret had been told. He spent his days in the guest house, but wandered often into the main house, telling James stories from our family's past stories even my father leaned in to hear. As for me, I found my balance. I returned to San Francisco, often my career continuing to grow, but I also came back here every few months. This house wasn't just property anymore, it was a bridge between who I had been and who I was becoming. And here's what I want you to take away from this. Sometimes the very thing that's used to push you out can become the thing that pulls you back in. If you've ever fought for your place, whether in a family, a career, or even within yourself, hit that subscribe button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that belonging isn't given. It's claimed. One evening on the porch where it all began, Grandpa handed me an envelope. Inside was a letter written years ago by Evelyn. Her words, still strong on the yellowed paper, read, "The house is not just wood and stone. It is a reminder that you are worthy of love and respect, exactly as you are." True belonging isn't about ownership, it's about courage. The courage to stand, the courage to forgive, the courage to build anew. I folded the letter with tears in my eyes, finally understanding. She hadn't just given me a house. She had given me freedom. The freedom to define family not by blood alone, but by choice, by respect, by love, without conditions. As I stood on the porch watching my parents laugh softly at James's little antics, watching Michael nudge Natalie with the ease of old affection, I felt something I hadn't in years. Hope. Not desperate, childlike hope for their approval, but the steady hope of a man who knows his worth and refuses to let it be diminished again. This house was mine, but more importantly, so was my place. As I look back now, I realize the true inheritance wasn't brick mortar or land. It was the lesson my grandmother left me hidden in that letter. Belonging isn't something handed to you by others. It's something you claim when you finally decide to stop shrinking, stop apologizing, and start standing in your truth. For years, I thought the house represented rejection, a place where I could never measure up. But standing on this porch today, I see it differently. It isn't a monument to their judgments, it's a testament to my survival. The walls that once held whispered insults and favoritism now echo with laughter, new beginnings, and the quiet rebuilding of bonds once thought broken beyond repair. I've learned that family is complicated. Sometimes it's cruel, sometimes it fails you. But it can also change. Not easily, not overnight, but through small steps, an apology whispered on a porch swing, a newborn child reminding us all of what truly matters, an old man's steady voice, insisting the truth be told. If there's one thing I hope you carry from my story, it's this: don't wait for others to validate your place. Don't beg for scraps at a table that was always meant to hold you. You are enough exactly as you are, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is draw the line, set the terms, and say, I belong, whether you see it or not. And if you've ever been made to feel like an outsider in your own family, I want you to know you're not alone. Subscribe, share this story, and let's keep building a community where everyone has a seat at the table. Because in the end, my grandmother was right, true belonging isn't given, it's claimed.